Hello, and welcome to our podcast for the University of Utah Press. My name is Hannah New. April is National Poetry Month, so today we have Kara Candito with us, author of Spectator, winner of the Aga Shahid Ali Poetry Prize, and Taste of Cherry, which won the Prairie Schooner Book Prize in Poetry. Welcome, Kara. Thank you for joining us through the phone today.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm going to dive right into the guts of the book here. A lot of these poems deal with the struggle of a U.S. citizen and a Mexican citizen navigating the immigration system, such as your poem, Ars Amatoria. Am I saying that right? Ars Amatoria?
Yeah.
So you want to marry a foreign national. And we were talking a little bit about this book when we interviewed one of our coworkers, Pat Hadley. He's married to a Canadian national, and he read your book while waiting for his wife's green card application to go through. And he said he identified very much with it. So what advice would you give someone in the immigration system, especially today?
I would say that be prepared to disassociate. You know, the idea is that you need to view yourselves and your relationship through a different lens. And when you stop thinking of it so personally, then it becomes more manageable. But obviously, I think that the extent to which we need to provide proof and evidence and craft a narrative of our lives and the history of our relationship in order to, gain citizenship, it's extreme in this country, and I can't even imagine what it's becoming like now, especially for foreign nationals from certain countries. So I think my book is very much, maybe it's now become an optimistic or a positive look at the experience. But I understand and empathize very much with the struggles that others are having. Also, in retrospect, the second piece of advice I can offer is don't believe the story you craft. In order to present evidence of your relationship and a story that is palatable to agents of the government, you obviously need to craft something simple, where we met, we fell in love, and it was perfect, and we made this decision, and then we lived happily ever after, and here we are, prepared to live the rest of our lives together. I think that at a certain point, we started to believe this neat story that we had to craft, and obviously day-to-day life is a lot more complicated than that. So I think once you're immersed in the process and you begin reading the story, then later you need to realize that's a fiction in many ways, totally separate from the reality of your lives together. So I guess that's what I would offer now several years later.
Oh, that's interesting. Expanding off of this, do you mind talking a little bit about the role of poetry in politics?
Sure, yeah. I think it's an interesting moment in American poetry because our daily lives are becoming politicized in a way that several years ago they weren't. Often when I speak to people from other countries, there's this implied assumption that poetry is inherently political and that the poet is very much an agent of speaking truth to power. And I think just because of the ways in which my autobiography has intersected with experiences and ideas that might be political, I've always approached poetry as kind of a dialogue between the personal and the political. But I'm seeing now in American poetry this return to poetry that is collective and political, and I think the last period in which this particular mode seemed prevalent was the beat poets, specifically Allen Ginsberg. So I think it's a moment when Americans are discovering that it's not uncouth or tacky to be political in one's work, and we're revisiting the idea that poetry can be an agent of change, not just of as a conduit for autobiographical experience or pure experimentation at the level of language. So I think it's a good moment for dialogue between poetry and politics and a revision of the relationship in our culture.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I agree with you. You have a series of poems in this book, Spectator, that feature the poet Frederico Garcia Lorca. Would you talk a little bit about those poems and about the poet and the inspiration for those poems?
Sure, and I think that also is kind of a nice transition into talking about the relationship between poetry and politics. After I finished my first book, I wasn't really prepared for the idea that my book was going to enter into the world and become this separate entity. And for the first time, I saw the kind of business and publishing side of poetry. And as someone who didn't really think very much about that until it actually happened, I found myself feeling kind of distrustful of my own voice as a poet and kind of cynical just about poetry and its possibilities. So as a way to, it started off as just an exercise, as a way to kind of reconnect with my voice as a poet. I revisited the poems of Frederico Garcia Lorca, who's always been a kind of central poet to me as a writer. And Lorca was writing during in the latter part of his writing life. He was writing when Franco took over Spain, and he was one of the several artists that took a concrete stand against Franco and didn't just live his life in exile or conform to a fascist regime. And he was eventually murdered for it. And to this day, they haven't found his body. He was part of a mass execution in southern Spain. So I see Lorca as, I admire his craft and the way that he kind of merges surrealism and more traditional lyricism. But I have always admired his kind of integrity and put him on a pedestal for that reason. So in the poems in Spectator, I'm thinking about entering into Lorca's consciousness, and obviously that's impossible. So what I'm doing is kind of creating a dialogue between me as a poet and kind of the spirit or the work of Lorca. And it became very much the kind of jumping off or starting point for my second book. So I can only continue to be thankful to Lorca and admire the work that he did while he was alive and the legacy that he's crafted.
Wow, great. You touched a little bit on that, the politics of publishing, and what advice do you have for poets out there? Maybe their first book has been accepted by a press, and what to expect with working with a press.
I would say, I remember someone, a very famous editor, said to me when I was a PhD student and my book had been accepted and I was sort of obsessing about it, he said, it's not really going to be a big deal. And at the time I was deeply offended, and not that I thought my book would enter into the world and change the landscape of poetry or anything like that. But I think in retrospect that was actually helpful advice, and I think it's important to realize that there will be kind of bumps in the road in terms of the relationship with editors and the actual typesetting process of the manuscript. Pay attention, but be flexible. And obviously, I think it's important to be a civil human being and also a poet in terms of your relationship with your press, and to definitely stand up for what you believe in and kind of your vision for the manuscript. Also, this kind of brought into consideration for me the idea of literary citizenship, and this notion before I had always read blurbs on the back of a book, but I didn't realize that many writers are expected to gather their own blurbs, and this became a kind of like a humbling and an interesting process, seeking out blurbs from the contest judge, for example, and other writers whom I admired, and the kind of generosity that goes into reading a manuscript willingly and writing something, however, kind of cliched blurb speak has become, writing something in support of a manuscript. And this is that kind of unpaid labor that poets often do for other poets. So I think definitely consider the generosities that helped make your book possible, and as you continue to write, perform those same acts of kindness for other poets. I think that was sort of the ultimate lesson with the publication of my first book.
Yeah, great. I like that, the literary community and being a respectful member of that. It's very true, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And just not being a jerk.
Yeah,
so,
yeah, don't be a jerk.
We obviously all remember the slights and the difficulties that we've experienced with other poets, but when I really think about it, the majority of my interactions have been really genuine and enriching, and I try to make that effort in terms of supporting others' work and being an advocate for my creative writing students and other sort of venues.
Great, thank you. So your poem, one of your poems in Spectator, Monologue During a Blackout, won a pushcart. It was very exciting to hear it won a pushcart. It was right before your book was released, so that was exciting for us on the publishing side. Do you mind discussing how this particular poem came about?
No, it's actually, it's one of those poems that actually has a story, So when I wrote this, I was visiting my now husband in Mexico City where he was living, and it was during the dry season, and his water was really not working, and there were severe storms, and we had about, I think, a 3-day blackout, where we had absolutely no electricity and no running water, and we kind of entered into this primitive state of sitting around, like going to cafes and charging our electronic devices, and at a certain point, most of the Wi-Fi connections were down, but we would just tell each other stories in the dark, mostly stories just about the past, about childhood, about the city, etc. And so the kind of impetus for that poem is actually speaking during a literal blackout. People have asked me, is this like an alcohol-induced or drug-induced blackout? And no, that was my first book. This is a genuine blackout. And kind of like just cutting oneself off from the sorts of modern comforts, we were able to achieve this new kind of communication that became really important for us.
Right. Do you mind reading that poem to us and maybe a few other poems?
Yeah, sure, no problem. Monologue During a Blackout. What about a zebra? Suppose you had to come back as a zebra, knowing you'd spend your life trampling the savannah with the desperation of an open during construction sign. Once, stepping off a plane onto the black top of an ancient city where my father was born, I smelled burning garbage and understood anything can happen. Often, it doesn't. The rain stops. We are not washed away. I do not glide down 5 black flights to beat the electric truck. But when the air conditioner aches on again, how blunt, how exquisite. No, I don't want to be famous. Yes, the radio. A man with the voice of a woman sings about a woman. The sky, you say, looks darker now. Would you call white a bright color? Would you like Bach better through headphones? I mean the seismic privacy of tiny, angry gods beating your middle ear. I mean to make you dizzy. Here, run your thumb along my chin while two workers shinny down a high-voltage pole, and everything that can pass between two people. Pleasure, shock, surveillance, the static of it, private or public, draws shut like curtains across a first-class cabin. What I thought in the dark, forget it. A group of zebras is called a harem. We call them black, we call them white. So now I think I'll actually read the first poem in the book that's kind of like an invocation of Lorca. Initiation number 5, Lorca. He is standing at the foot of my bed with an insanely tragic smile and a syringe full of lead. He is sitting beside me in a bloodless body, stroking the pink sheets with eyes like a fruit that's never in season. Burning casinos and countries I'll never visit pass over the room. I am here to learn how to suffer more beautifully. Outside, at the bus stop, thin men in scrubs read about nanobots, and maybe they can map the malignant cells unspooling in my marrow, or the best, fastest path of a bullet entering the chest. Inside, in another dimension, we are riding 2 lame mares to the pasture, where I am ravaged by centaur after centaur, never a spatter. Bodies matter, how they break open, which animals we let inside us. I am here to learn how to suffer more beautifully, to smile for the white bear and give everything away. I will read 2 more now. I think maybe just because you had asked me about Lorca today, I'll read one more Lorca poem, and this is actually a persona poem in the voice of Lorca, who's addressing Dali, with whom he had a very interesting, creative relationship and also an intimate friendship. And Lorca, according to the letters, definitely had feelings beyond friendship for Dali, and Dali was not, willing to pursue that with him. And also when Franco invaded Spain, Dali was one of the artists who I don't think he formally converted to fascism, but he definitely conformed to the new regime and saved himself by doing this. And Lorca obviously took a very different path, and his life ended early. So this is Lorca's last letter to Dali, August 20th, 1936. What part of your dream logic will tell you I wasn't looking for science or your cock? I stumbled into the orchard with my hands bound and my pocket stuffed with bitter oranges. The law is an affectation. Its roots are bare wires. The mind reaches only as far as the fingers. Today, I am map, grove, moan, a boy in cold bathwater crying, Father. I play pallet to the frozen aqueduct of your wrist, which is a firing squad, the shallow grave where I bleed beside a matador and an old school teacher, his beard full of famished doves. Tonight, in Cadiz, the foreign fortune teller wears a collar of bees, and horse bees turn bacchanals into lullabies outside the walls of the city. Am I the death mask every gypsy boy clutches to his chest? If forgiveness is a smile of bullets, then my name means antiseptic, and it will sting each time you touch a paintbrush. There is no one who can sing without hearing the cries of pinned olive trees. There is no one who can say, we did not lie side by side, tucked into the twin coffins of our lives, while Spain emptied its ashtrays into our mouths. And so the final poem that I will read is actually the last one. In the book, it begins with a line from Ovid, and it's titled Epithalamium with Swan Song. An epithalamium is a poem in celebration of a marriage. I will not harm our affection by an alien love, but sometimes I'll wake at 4 a.m. to follow the palpitating notes of a song that makes suffering interesting again. To the edge of the brackish water into which I'll wade, expecting to be ravished, except instead the swan will demand great shredded hunks of white bread. And in the world where you will always be breathing beside me, a song like honking or hissing, bugling call. And in the world where blue bathing suit bottoms will mold on the shower rod, remember me as that skinny girl with Lorca-esque eyes who fed you 12 white grapes on New Year's Eve. Nightly, you'll make the international sign for choking or praying. Nightly, I will feed you my body. Familiarity will be our first sin. So that's it.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for reading to us today and for talking to us through the phone.
Hannah, I'm having some trouble with the audio, but I would just like to say thank you as well. It was a pleasure. And I look forward to listening to the podcast. Thank you, University of Utah.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. This has been Hannah New for the University of Utah Press. If you would like to learn more about the Aga Shahid Ali Poetry Prize, please check out our website at www.uofupress.com. Thank you.